In the 1840s, the Victorian journalist Henry Mayhew observed and documented the state of working people in London for a series of articles in a newspaper, the Morning Chronicle, that were later compiled into the book, London Labour and the London Poor. Mayhew went into great detail about the lives of people living in the city and, importantly, for understanding the brutal reality of what life was really like for the many and not the few in 19th century London. He took the trouble to interview workers so that we have a genuine first-hand account of life. Mayhew interviewed everyone: beggars, street entertainers, market traders, harlots, labourers, sweatshop workers, even down to the mudlarks, who searched the stinking mud on the banks of the River Thames for scrap from passing ships. He described their clothes, how and where they lived, their entertainments and customs. His account highlights how marginal and precarious many people's lives were in what, at that time, was perhaps the richest city in the world. Mayhew's work describes many lesser-known and now obsolete trades driven by sheer poverty. In particular, the subject of this video is the Bone Grubber. This occupation was as dreadful in reality as it sounds, involving an extreme form of recycling. You will learn in detail about the wretched conditions of those who found themselves trapped in this form of work in order to earn money to feed themselves. Before we start, please consider clicking the subscribe button in the bottom right of your screen for more content like this. If you find this video interesting, I would really appreciate it if you could give it a thumbs up and share it widely with friends and family. These two things really do show your support and help the channel grow so I can bring you more. Thank you. Check out the description for links to more interesting videos about the Victorians, and take a look at the channel page for even more content. The habits of the Bone Grubber is a wandering, unsettled sort of life, being compelled to be continually on foot and to travel many miles every day in search of the articles in which they deal. They seldom have any fixed place of abode, and are mostly to be found at night in one or other of the low lodging houses throughout London. The majority are, moreover, persons who have been brought up to other employments, but who from some failing or mishap have been reduced to such a state of distress that they were obliged to take to their present occupation, and have never after been able to get away from it. Of the whole class, it is considered that there are from 800 to 1,000 resident in London, one half of whom, at the least, sleep in the cheap lodging houses. The government returns estimate the number of mendicants' lodging houses in London to be upwards of 200, allowing 2 bone grubbers and pure finders to frequent of these lodging houses. There will be upwards of 400 availing themselves of such nightly shelters. As many more, I am told, live in garrets and ill-furnished rooms in the lowest neighbourhoods. There is no instance on record of any of the class renting even the smallest house for himself. Moreover, there are in London during the winter a number of persons called trampers, who employ themselves at that season in street finding. These people are in the summer country labourers of some sort, but as soon as the harvest and potato getting and hop picking are over, and they can find nothing else to do in the country, they come back to London to avail themselves of the shelter of the night asylums or refuges for the destitute, usually called straw yards by the poor. For if they remained in the provinces at that period of the year, they would be forced to have recourse to the unions, and as they can only stay one night in each place, they would be obliged to travel from 10 to 15 miles per day, to which in the winter they have a strong objection. They come up to London in the winter, not to look for any regular work or employment, but because they know they can have a nightly shelter and bread night and morning for nothing, during that season, and can, during the day, collect bones, rags, etc. As soon as the straw yards close, which is generally about the beginning of April, the trampers again start off to the country in small bands of 2 or 3, and without any fixed residence keep wandering about all the summer, sometimes begging their way through the villages and sleeping in the casual wards of the unions, and sometimes, when hard driven, working at haymaking or any other light labour. Those among the bone grubbers who do not belong to the regular trampers have been either navvies or men who have not been able to obtain employment at their own business and have been driven to it by necessity as a means of obtaining a little bread for the time being, and without any intention of pursuing the calling regularly. But as I have said, when once in the business, they cannot leave it, for at least they make certain of getting a few halfpence by it, and their present necessity does not allow them time to look after other employment. There are many of these street finders who are old men and women, and many very young children who have no other means of living. Since the famine in Ireland, vast numbers of that unfortunate people, particularly boys and girls, have been engaged in gathering bones and rags in the streets. The bone picker and rag gatherer may be known at once by the greasy bag which he carries on his back. Usually he has a stick in his hand, and this is armed with a spike or hook for the purpose of more easily turning over the heaps of ashes or dirt that are thrown out of the houses, and discovering whether they contain anything that is saleable at the rag and bottle or marine store shop. The bone grubber generally seeks out the narrow back streets where the dust and refuse are cast, or where any dust bins are accessible. The articles for which he chiefly searches are rags and bones. Rags he prefers, but waste metal, such as bits of lead, pewter, copper, brass, or old iron, he prizes above all. Whatever he meets with that he knows to be in any way saleable, he puts into the bag at his back. He often finds large lumps of bread which have been thrown out as waste by the servants, and occasionally the housekeepers will give him some bones on which there is a little meat remaining. These constitute the morning meal of most of the class. One of my informants had a large rump of beef bone given to him a few days previous to my seeing him, on which there was not less than a pound of meat. The bone pickers and rag gatherers are all early risers. They have all their separate beats or districts, and it is most important to them that they should reach their district before anyone else of the same class can go over the ground. Some of the beats lie as far as Peckham, Clapham, Hammersmith, Hampstead, Bow, Stratford, and indeed all parts within about 5 miles of London. In summer time they rise at 2 in the morning, and sometimes earlier. It is not quite light at this hour, but bones and rags can be discovered before daybreak. The grubbers scour all quarters of London, but abound more particularly in the suburbs, in the neighbourhood of Petticoat Lane and Ragfair. However, they are the most numerous on account of the greater quantity of rags thrown out. It usually takes the bone picker from 7 to 9 hours to go over his rounds, during which time he travels from 20 to 30 miles with a quarter to a half hundredweight on his back. In the summer he usually reaches home about 11 of the day, and in the winter about 1 or 2. On his return home, he proceeds to sort the contents of his bag. He separates the rags from the bones, and these again from the old metal, if he be lucky enough to have found any. He divides the rags into various lots, according as they are white or coloured, and if he has picked up any pieces of canvas or sacking, he makes these also into a separate parcel. When he has finished the sorting, he takes his several lots to the rag shop, or the marine store dealer, and realises upon them whatever they may be worth. For the white rags he gets from 2p to 3p per pound, according as they are clean or soiled. The white rags are very difficult to be found. They are mostly very dirty, and are therefore sold with the coloured ones at the rate of about £5 for 2p. The bones are usually sold with the coloured rags at one and the same price. For fragments of canvas or sacking, the grubber gets about 3 farthings a pound, and old brass, copper and pewter about 4p. The marine storekeepers say 5p, and old iron 1 farthing per pound, or £6 for 1p. The bone grubber thinks he has done an excellent day's work if he can earn 8p, and some of them, especially the very old and the very young, do not earn more than from 2p to 3p a day. To make 10p a day at the present price of rags and bones, a man must be remarkably active and strong. Aye, and lucky too, adds my informant. The average amount of earnings, I am told, varies from about 6p to 8p per day, or from 3 shillings to 4 shillings a week. And the highest amount that a man, the most brisk and persevering at the business, can by any possibility earn in 1 week is about 5 shillings. But this can only be accomplished by great good fortune and industry. The usual weekly gains are about half that sum. In bad weather, the bone grubber cannot do so well, because the rags are wet, and they cannot sell them. The majority pick up bones only in wet weather. Those who do gather rags during or after rain are obliged to wash and dry them before they can sell them. The state of the shoes of the rag and bone picker is a very important matter to him, for if he be well shod, he can get quickly over the ground, but he is frequently lamed and unable to make any progress from the blisters and gashes on his feet, occasioned by the want of proper shoes. Sometimes the bone grubbers will pick up a stray 6p or a shilling that has been dropped in the street. "The handkerchief over round my neck," said one whom I saw, "I picked up with 1 shilling in the corner. The greatest prize I ever found was the brass cap of the nave of a coach wheel. And I did once find a £1/4 of tobacco in Sun Street, Bishopsgate. The best bit of luck of all that I ever had was finding a cheque for £12 15 shillings lying in the gateway of the morning coach yard in Tichborne Street, Haymarket. I was going to light my pipe with it. Indeed, I picked it up for that purpose, and then saw it was a cheque. It was on the London and County Bank, 21 Lombard Street. I took it there and got 10 shillings for finding it. I went there in my rags, as I am now, and the cashier stared a bit at me. The cheque was drawn by Mr. Nibb, and payable to a Mr. Cox. I did think I should have got the odd 15 shillings, though. Between the London and St. Catherine's Docks and Rosemary Lane, there is a large district interlaced with narrow lanes, courts and alleys ramifying into each other in the most intricate and disorderly manner, insomuch that it would be no easy matter for a stranger to work his way through the interminable confusion without the aid of a guide, resident in and well conversant with the locality. The houses are of the poorest description, and seem as if they tumbled into their places at random. Foul channels, huge dust heaps, and a variety of other unsightly objects occupy every open space, and dabbling among these are crowds of ragged, dirty children who grub and wallow, as if in their native element. None reside in these places but the poorest and most wretched of the population. And, as might almost be expected, this, the cheapest and filthiest locality of London, is the headquarters of the bone grubbers and other street finders. I have ascertained on the best authority that from the centre of this place, within a circle of a mile in diameter, there dwell not less than 200 persons of this class. In this quarter I found a bone grubber who gave me the following account of himself. "I was born in Liverpool, and when about 14 years of age, my father died. He used to work about the docks, and I used to run on errands for any person who wanted me. I managed to live by this after my father's death for 3 or 4 years. I had a brother, older than myself, who went to France to work on the railroads. When I was about 18, he sent for me and got me to work with himself on the Paris and Rouen Railway, under Mackenzie and Brassey, who had the contract. I worked on the railroads in France for 4 years, till the disturbance broke out, and then we all got notice to leave the country. When we got to Southampton, we all went before the mayor, and he paid the fare to London on the railroad. I looked for work everywhere, but could get nothing to do. I tried all I could to get something to do, till the money was nearly gone. And then I took to selling lucifers, and the fly papers that they use in the shops, and little things like that. But I could do no good at this work. There were too many at it before me, and they knew more about it than I did. At last I got so bad off I didn't know what to do. But seeing a great many about here gathering bones and rags, I thought I'd do so too. A poor fellow must do something. I was advised to do so, and I have been at it ever since. Oh, I forgot to tell you that my brother died in France. We had good wages there, 4 francs a day, or 3 shillings 4 pence English. I don't make more than 3 pence or 4 pence, and sometimes 6 pence a day at bone picking. I don't go out before daylight to gather anything, because the police takes my bag and throws all I've gathered about the street, to see if I've anything stolen in it. I never stole anything in my life. Indeed, I'd do anything before I'd steal. Many a night I've slept under an arch of the railway when I hadn't a penny to pay for my bed. But whenever the police find me that way, they make me and the rest get up and drive us on and tell us to keep moving. I don't go out on wet days. There's no use in it, as the things won't be bought. I can't wash and dry them because I'm in a lodging house. There's a great deal more than 100 bone pickers about here, men, women and children. The Jews in this lane and up in Petticoat Lane give a good deal of victuals away on the Saturday. They sometimes call one of us in from the street to light the fire for them, or to take off the kettle, as they must not do anything themselves on the Sabbath. And then they put some food on the footpath and throw rags and bones into the streets for us, because they must not hand anything to us. There are some about here who get a couple of shillings worth of goods and go on board the ships and the docks and exchange them for bones and bits of old canvas among the sailors. I'd buy and do so too if only I had the money, but I can't get it. The summer is the worst time for us. The winter is much better, for there is more meat used in winter, and then there are more bones. Others say differently. I intend to go to the country this season and try to get something to do at the haymaking and harvest. I make about 2 shillings 6 pence a week, and the way I manage is this. Sometimes I get a piece of bread about 12 o'clock, and I make my breakfast of that and cold water. Very seldom do I have any dinner. Unless I earn 6 pence, I can't get any. And then I have a basin of nice soup, or a pennet of plum pudding and a couple of baked potatoes. Last night I got 1/4 of a pence worth of coffee, 1/2 a pence worth of sugar, and 1 1/4 pence worth of bread. And then I have 2 pence a night left for my lodging. I always try to manage that, for I'd do anything sooner than stop out all night. I'm always happy the day when I make 4 pence, for then I know I won't have to sleep in the street. The winter before last, there was a straw yard down in Black Jack's Alley, where we used to go after 6 o'clock in the evening and get a £1/2 of bread, and another £1/2 in the morning, and then we'd gather what we could in the daytime and buy victuals with what we got for it. We were well off then, but the straw yard wasn't open at all last winter. There used to be 300 of us in there of a night. A great many of the dock labourers and their families were there, for no work was to be got in the docks, so they weren't able to pay rent and were obliged to go in. I've lost me health since I took to bone picking through the wet and cold in the winter, for I've scarcely any clothes, and the wet gets to me feet through the old shoes. This caused me last winter to be 9 weeks in the hospital of the Whitechapel workhouse. The narrator of this tale seemed so dejected and broken in spirit that it was with difficulty his story was elicited from him. He was evidently labouring under incipient consumption. I have every reason to believe that he made a truthful statement. Indeed, he did not appear to me to have sufficient intellect to invent a falsehood. It is a curious fact, indeed, with reference to the London street finders generally, that they seem to possess less rational power than any other class. They appear utterly incapable of trading even in the most trifling commodities. probably from the fact that buying articles for the purpose of selling them at a profit requires an exercise of the mind to which they feel themselves incapable. Begging, too, requires some ingenuity or tact in order to move the sympathies of the well-to-do, and the street-finders being incompetent for this, they work on day after day as long as they are able to crawl about in pursuit of their unprofitable calling. This cannot be fairly said of the younger members of this class who are sent into the streets by their parents, and many of whom are afterwards able to find some more reputable and more lucrative employment. As a body of people, however, young and old, they mostly exhibit the same stupid, half-witted appearance. To show how bone grubbers occasionally manage to obtain shelter during the night, the following incident may not be out of place. A few mornings past I accidentally encountered one of this class in a narrow back lane. His ragged coat, the colour of the rubbish among which he toiled, was greased over, probably with the fat of the bones he gathered, and being mixed with the dust it seemed as if the man were covered with bird-lime. His shoes, torn and tied on his feet with pieces of cord, had doubtlessly been picked out of some dustbin, while his greasy bag and stick unmistakably announced his calling. Desirous of obtaining all the information possible on this subject, I asked him a few questions, took his address, which he gave without hesitation, and bade him call on me in the evening, at the time appointed. However, he did not appear. On the following day, therefore, I made way to the address he had given, and on reaching the spot, I was astonished to find the house in which he said he had lived was uninhabited. A padlock was on the door, the boards of which were parting with age. There was not a whole pane of glass in any of the windows, and the frames of many of them were shattered or demolished. Some persons in the neighbourhood, noticing me eyeing the place, asked whom I wanted. On my telling the man's name, which it appeared he had not dreamt of disguising, I was informed that he had left the day before, saying he had met the landlord in the morning, for such it turned out he had fancied me to be, and that the gentleman had wanted him to come to his house, but he was afraid to go lest he should be sent to prison for breaking into the place. I found on inspection that the premises, though locked up, could be entered by the rear, one of the window frames having been removed, so that admission could be obtained through the aperture. Availing myself of the same mode of ingress, I proceeded to examine the premises. Nothing could well be more dismal or dreary than the interior. The floors were rotting with damp and mildew, especially near the windows where the wet found easy entrance. The walls were even slimy and discoloured, and everything bore the appearance of desolation. In one corner was strewn a bundle of dirty straw, which doubtlessly had served the bone grubber for a bed, while scattered about the floor were pieces of bones and small fragments of dirty rags, sufficient to indicate the calling of the late inmate. He had but little difficulty in removing his property, seeing that it consisted solely of his bag and his stick.